about the future of financial reporting. So financial reporting, Jan has perhaps something boring to it. I can tell you it's not boring in the context of crypto. It's actually a very exciting and evolving area. And so what do we really mean by financial reporting, right? So with traditional companies, financial reporting usually refers to management of these companies preparing financial statements. Financial statements being balance sheet, income statement, and a cash flow statement. Now, what these statements do is provide information around the financial health and performance of these companies. And this information is useful to a variety of stakeholders, but in particular to the likes of investors and lenders, for example. And the financial statements help these stakeholders make decisions around engaging with these companies or continuing to stay engaged. Another thing that financial statements do is provide information to the management of these companies around planning for the future. And financial regulators worldwide mandate that public companies periodically file financial statements. So in the US, for example, you have to file as a public company a Form 10Q, which is a quarterly report with the SEC every quarter. Now, as decentralized entities, crypto projects typically don't have a CFO or a investor relations department. However, crypto communities also need information for financial decision making. So what Messari has been doing over the last year and a half or so is financial reporting for crypto projects, so in the form of quarterly reports that we publish at the beginning of every quarter for a range of clients. So coming this second quarter, we will be doing around 40 of those. Now, the reason why these regulators like the SEC ask or mandate that companies file these quarterly reports is to promote transparency. And that is actually, that's really great in theory, but there's a conflict of interest when you have these centralized companies between the management of these companies and the shareholders. And these ledgers, they are closed, right? They sit behind closed doors. So what that means is that there's usually a lot of creative accounting going on. And if you're a financial analyst, if you work for Goldman and you have to analyze these companies, that usually involves a lot of decoding and simplification of these financial statements to get to really understand it and be able to compare apples to apples between different companies. Now, as open source ledgers, public blockchain reduce that agency problem. And they provide transparency, they're also immutable, and theoretically you can also provide these in real time. And that is actually the holy grail of financial reporting. And there's a lot of investors out there that are very excited about the potential that open ledgers provide from that perspective. Well, so in theory, it's very transparent and accessible, but it's actually hard, right? No one goes to a blockchain and reads the TVL of Uniswap version 3 like right off the chain, right? It actually involves quite a lot of work. And I like to think of the process as a pyramid, right? So at the bottom of the pyramid sits the raw data that you pull off the blockchain and that you store into tables. But that data is still pretty hard to work with, right? It's hex data. So in order to make that data into information that we can actually do something with and that humans can actually read, it needs to be decoded, it needs to be normalized and simplified. And what can be done with it next is aggregations. So you can then put this data together to turn it into actual metrics like TVL or like trading volume, or more complicated aggregations. For example, look at the TVL of all DEXs on Ethereum, right? And once you have these metrics, you can create tables and charts, and that can be analyzed by analysts that can then draw insights from it. And the holy grail there is actionable insights. So for example, alpha in the case of investors. Now you guys know this because you're developers, or most of you, I think. But yeah, so this is what it looks like, the raw transaction data, very different from the relatively polished picture that you get served up in Etherscan. Now, and what we're really looking for is, so crypto data, right? So in that black screen, that is the real crypto data. What we want is actually an interpretation of that data. So these metrics are interpretations, right? So for example, here, this is a chart from one of our quarterly reports. Filecoin produced 18.9 million in supply-side revenue over Q1 2023. Now, why I call that an interpretation, when it comes down to these kind of numbers and even more complicated aggregations, I may get a very different number than you, right? So it's probably really relatively easy to, you know, for example, calculate a trading volume for like a single protocol, and you may get relative consensus if you have a number of different people calculating that. But when you get into more complicated things, like my previous example, calculated TVL, the aggregate TVL for all DEXs on Ethereum, you probably get different numbers. So hence we call that interpretations of data. And there's nothing right or wrong with that, just different, you know, views, different opinions of different people, how to calculate these things. Now, doing this, like the financial reporting, so to say, for crypto protocols, also actually involves like quite a number of different people. It involves like people with different skill sets. And one thing that's actually not shown here, but that I wanted to highlight as well is another party, and that's the source of your data. So we use data from a number of different sources depending on, you know, what the protocol is. But one source that we use and that we're very proud of to be using that I want to highlight here is the Graph protocol. So for those of you not familiar, the Graph is a decentralized indexing protocol for blockchain data, and they have a concept called subgraphs. And the graph allows anyone to build a subgraph, which is effectively an open API. And then Messari is a core subgraph developer. And so we're very proud that the code that we developed for these subgraphs is out there, and that everyone can see our interpretation of the various metrics. And one thing that we also do for the graph is standardize these metrics for subsectors. So that when you look at Uniswap and at SushiSwap, for example, that we calculate all the metrics that we report on for those in the same way, and that we're showing the same metrics for them. Now going back to this actual picture, so the research analysts, our research analysts are sector specialists, and they cover a number of protocols in their sector. So for example, layer ones. And what they do whenever we start covering a new protocol or new network, they will think about what the most important metrics for that network are, that most accurately reflect how that protocol is doing in terms of financial health and performance. And then armed with that, they go to the data science team, so the data engineer and the analytics engineer, who then go out and collect the various data points that the analyst needs to calculate all these metrics. So the data engineer finds the sources, ingests them into our data warehouse and does the decoding of the smart contracts. And then after that, the analytics engineers go to work and they transform that decoded data into actual metrics that the analyst can work with. Then the analyst creates tables and charts and analyzes that data and produces context and insights on that. And then finally, we also work closely together with the protocol in case we have any questions about the data, making sure, for example, that we have all the smart contracts addresses that we need. And when we do these reports for the first time, we typically also ask them to sanity check the data because they know their protocol or network best, so it's probably easy to see if something looks horribly off, and because, for example, we're missing a smart contract address. And this is what the results look like. So, for example, for Polycon, the financial statements. And one thing that we look to do, as I alluded to before, is in the context of the graph, is make these relatively standard across similar protocols, so that you can compare apples to apples if you want to. And it's not completely all the same because every protocol has their nuances because of their specific technology or business model or whatever the secret sauce is. Yeah, but that's what it looks like. And then, as I said, there's also a lot of charting going on in these reports because it's interesting for the consumers of these reports to also see the actual trends. And this is also how analysts really dive into details and figure out what is going on and are able to provide further insight. And another thing that we do there, we don't just study the quantitative data, but also qualitative data around it. So we look at, what events happened during the quarter that were important, what governance discussions that are important are going on, what proposals passed, what big grants have been awarded, etc. Yeah, what does the roadmap look like? And all because it helps us analyze, why certain things happened the way they were. And it also allows us to give some insight into what may be happening in the coming quarter. Yeah, and so that's standardization. I talked about it in the context of the graph. We think that's quite important so that you can actually compare apples to apples, and that sounds like something very logic and sensible, and it is, but it's definitely not the case in a lot of situations because people interpret things in different ways, like we discussed before. So that's where our breadth of coverage, so we almost cover like 40 protocols right now, and that standardization allows us to actually do that. And we've started also to produce some of this at a sector level. So like with the case of the state of L1, so these are all the L1s that we currently cover and the various metrics. I actually pasted the link of the report like underneath it. So it's like these reports are all openly accessible to anyone. So if you're interested to look at further metrics across layer ones, the link is down there. Now, these are the quarterly reports, but our research team also does other stuff with data. And what is unique about crypto is that you can really drill down further into the details, right? When Coca-Cola publishes their annual report, you don't have that ability, right? And a lot of business intelligence sits behind closed doors. In particular, the further you dive down into the details, the more private that information usually is. Well, for crypto, as we discussed, it provides that transparency. It doesn't mean that it's easy to do, but it is possible. And that can get you to really interesting insights. And this is from a report on Solana that we produced, I believe it was last week. And when you look at the on-chain liquidity of these ecosystems, as it's a metric that people are obviously interested in, it shows that the TVLs of all these ecosystems have obviously fallen in light of the Black Swan events like last year, but Solana had fallen more than everyone else, and it hadn't recovered as well. So if you take that at face value, that may not give you a fuzzy feeling around that. However, when we started drilling down into user-level data, what we actually saw, that there was actually a lot of positive stuff happening on Solana. So user activity last month, for example, in May, doubled. But it did not show up in that TVL data. And so we dug further, and what we noted is that there had been a lot of developer activity going on Solana, but in the consumer sector. So there were a lot of new consumer applications that had been launched. So hence that didn't show up in that TVL data, which is obviously very DeFi-centric. Anyway, just an example. Now, so what, right? So who is great, Messari, that you guys are publishing all these reports, but who's using this actually, right? Or who is this useful to? And let me give you one other user level example, also a report that we did probably about a month ago about decentralized social and the social graph, but you can equally apply it elsewhere. And that is this user data, so user engagement and user behavior data can be quite useful for builders, right? So because you can effectively see what dog food the dogs are eating and what crypto native features are really attracting users, so to say. So that gives you important intelligence. Another area where we've seen our quarterly reporting being used is on some of these forums. So Gauntlet, they've been building on some of the analysis that we've been doing and some of the insights that we've provided for in our Venus quarterly report of Q1. Proposal discussion regarding deploying Uniswap version 3 on the Filecoin virtual machine. Been using various charts of us. And but we also get obviously user data from who accesses these reports, and we distribute them typically in a number of different ways. So it goes out through our newsletter, which goes to a couple of 100,000 users every day. We tweet about them, we host them in our research portal. But we also have partnerships with some TradFi institutions, so with Bloomberg, Refinitiv, and S&P, and we get some user data from that, and they're actually being used consistently by very high-profile investors. Now, why is this useful to investors, right? These investors have really small teams, right? And they don't have the resources to do all of this stuff, get this data for 100 protocols that they may look at, right? So that's why this is useful, and it's obviously unlike in TradFi that isn't been done by decentralized entities. So hence this is a go-to for them to get that type of information. Finally, as I mentioned before, the holy grail is real-time financial reporting. And you know, there is obviously real-time metrics out there, right? I mean, we host some of them, right? You can also go to DeFi Llama or Token Terminal, right, for like TVL or trading volumes or whatever it is that you're going after. But what I say with real-time financial reporting is the holy grail is having these actual reports, having actual insight, the overall picture, so to say, having that in real time. If you think about traditional financial reporting, what is so interesting about it is that you have an overarching framework of balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement that everyone uses, right? Now, the devil is then in the details because it looks very different for a bank than it looks for a software firm. But they still use the same framework. And we've been thinking about, okay, so how can we build a similar framework for crypto? And too much detail to go in for the purpose of this discussion. It's traditional balance sheet and income statement and cash flow statement don't really work. You can maybe see that for a DeFi protocol, how it could potentially work, but definitely not for a layer one. So what we came up with, we basically think that crypto communities need info that we can group basically in 3 different areas or 3 different statements. So product usage in the usage statements, who value accrues to in a value accrual statement, and who controls the protocol and can make changes represented in a governance statement. So this is just a little preview of what we're hoping to bring later this year. It isn't there yet, but wanted to share our views on that. Now, finally, ultimately, all of this financial reporting is about unlocking the potential of these open source ledgers. And it's something that is very close to our mission at Messari. So our mission is to provide transparency to the crypto economy and to help stakeholders make better decisions. So that's what we do with these reports. And yeah, if you want to learn more, hit me up. And definitely check out the reports if those are of interest on you. They're all openly accessible on Messari.io. Thank you very much.